The sight of American doomsday planes landing in Washington has historically meant one thing. Somewhere in the world, a regime is about to fall. In June 2025, as tensions between Iran and Israel reached a breaking point with Israeli attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities, the world watched as two former allies turned bitter enemies engaged in their most direct confrontation yet. But how did we get here? How did two nations that once secretly cooperated become archenemies willing to risk everything to destroy each other? Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini has come to power, denouncing Israel as an illegitimate Zionist regime and declaring Israel an enemy of Islam and the little Satan. Logic would dictate that this marked the end of any cooperation between the two nations. Yet reality, as it often does, defied logic. The answer lies in a complex web of geopolitical calculations, religious ideology, and strategic necessity that spans over 4 decades. To understand today's crisis, we must first journey back to a time when Iran and Israel were not enemies, but unlikely partners in a hostile Middle Eastern landscape. Israel hoped to build ties with moderate factions within the Iranian government, particularly figures like Rafsanjani, believing these moderates could eventually steer Iran toward a more pragmatic foreign policy. This doctrine was motivated by the idea that Israel and Imperial Iran saw Arab powers as a common threat, and Ethiopia-Israel could create a strategic alliance that would counterbalance Arab hostility. For Iran, this partnership offered a way to project power beyond its borders and challenge Arab hegemony in the region. In a region dominated by hostile Arab states, both Israel and Iran were outliers. Israel as a Jewish state, Iran as a Persian Shia power in a predominantly Arab Sunni world. For Iran, working with Israel served multiple purposes. It provided access to advanced military technology, created a backdoor to American intelligence, and offered a counterweight to Arab nationalism. By positioning itself as the defender of Palestinian rights, Iran could appeal to Muslims across sectarian lines and challenge Arab governments that had failed to liberate Palestine. Iran's consistent rhetoric since 1979 has been that they believe Israel is an illegitimate state and should be expelled from the region, with their goal being to erode Israel's legitimacy around the world. Unlike Iran's regular military, the IRGC is specifically tasked with protecting the Islamic Republic's revolutionary ideology and projecting power abroad. It's through the IRGC that Iran has built its axis of resistance, a network of proxy organizations that includes Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Palestine, and the Houthis in Yemen. Iran's nuclear program, which began in earnest in the 1990s, represents an existential threat in Israeli eyes. The targeting of these facilities represents a calculated attempt to set back Iran's nuclear program by years, if not decades. A nuclear-armed Iran would be immune to the kind of regime change operations that toppled governments in Iraq and Libya. Nuclear weapons would also provide Iran with the ultimate deterrent against Israeli preemptive strikes and American intervention. For a country the size of Israel, smaller than many American states, and surrounded by hostile neighbors, the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran is simply unacceptable. Picture this. It's 1980, and the Islamic Revolution has just swept through Iran. The unprecedented scale and brutality of the attack, which killed over 1,200 Israelis and took 250 hostages, convinced Israeli leaders that the existing status quo was unsustainable. For Israel, the attack demonstrated that Iran's proxy strategy had reached an unacceptable level of sophistication and lethality. Iran's investment in proxy organizations created a network of allies that could strike at Israeli interests across the region. Hezbollah, in particular, became Iran's most capable proxy, amassing an arsenal of over 100,000 rockets and missiles pointed at Israel. The Islamic Republic operates through a complex hierarchy that concentrates ultimate power in the hands of the supreme leader, while maintaining democratic institutions below. And his vision of exporting the Islamic Revolution was fundamentally at odds with maintaining ties to Israel. This position has been embedded with official rhetoric, military programs, state-sponsored education, and symbolic events such as Quds Day that reinforce hostility toward Israel. The supreme leader's word is final on all matters of state, from media policy to military strategy. Rather than engaging in direct confrontation, Iran has created a ring of allied militias that can strike at Israeli interests while maintaining plausible deniability. This approach allows Iran to pressure Israel without risking the full retaliation that direct conflict would bring. The contradiction was unsustainable, and by the mid-1980s, the cracks were beginning to show. The supreme leader envisioned Iran as the leader of the Islamic world, championing the cause of oppressed Muslims everywhere. In this narrative, Israel became the perfect enemy, a symbol of Western imperialism and a rallying point for Islamic unity. Despite Khomeini's public rhetoric, the Islamic Republic continued to accept military supplies from Israel throughout the 1980s, maintaining a secret relationship that both governments felt was in their mutual interest. This wasn't just about pragmatism, it was about survival. Iran was locked in a brutal war with Iraq, a conflict that would claim over 1 million lives and drain the country's resources. Limited cooperation between Israel and Iran continued into the 1980s, but later a hostile rivalry emerged as Iran built up and funded proxy militias and other groups in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen. This shift represented a fundamental change in Iranian strategic thinking. The irony was palpable. The Islamic Republic that had sworn to destroy Israel was simultaneously keeping it fueled, while the Zionist state that Iran had branded as illegitimate was helping arm its military. Meanwhile, Israel found itself increasingly isolated in a region where Arab nations had declared economic warfare, refusing to supply the Jewish state with oil. The Arab oil embargo had put Israel in a precarious position, and they needed alternative sources of energy. In those early days, both nations faced existential threats. Enter one of history's most unlikely partnerships. Through covert channels, Iran began secretly supplying oil to Israel, while Israel provided Iran with much-needed military equipment. This cooperation wasn't just about oil and weapons. To understand why this partnership made sense, we need to examine Israel's periphery doctrine, a strategic framework that guided Israeli foreign policy for decades. The logic was simple but brilliant. By aligning with non-Arab states on the periphery of the Middle East, Iran, Turkey, but this alliance was built on shaky foundations. Khomeini's doctrine proclaimed neither East nor West, only the Islamic Republic. The transformation from covert cooperation to open hostility didn't happen overnight. As Iran stabilized following the Islamic Revolution, Khomeini's broader ambitions began to take shape. The Palestinian cause provided Iran with the perfect vehicle for this strategy. To understand how Iran transformed from Israel's covert partner to its greatest enemy, we must examine Iran's unique political system. At the apex sits the supreme leader, currently Ali Khamenei, who has held the position since 1989. Below the supreme leader is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which functions as the regime's Praetorian Guard. This proxy strategy represents Iran's most significant innovation in its conflict with Israel. The introduction of nuclear weapons into the Iran-Israel equation fundamentally altered the nature of their conflict. Recent strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, including Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, demonstrate how seriously both Israel and the United States take this threat. From Iran's perspective, nuclear weapons represent the ultimate guarantee of regime survival. While Iran and Israel avoided direct confrontation for decades, their proxy war intensified dramatically. The October 7, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel marked a turning point in this proxy conflict. The unprecedented scale and brutality of the attack, which killed over 1,200 Israelis and took 250 hostages, convinced Israeli leaders that the existing status quo was unsustainable. For Israel, the attack demonstrated that Iran's proxy strategy had reached an unacceptable level of sophistication and lethality. Hamas's leadership was decimated, with key figures like Ismail Haniyeh and Yahya Sinwar eliminated in carefully planned operations. The deployment of America's Doomsday aircraft, a flying command center used only in the most extreme circumstances, signaled that the United States was preparing for major military action. Yet Trump's actions seemed contradictory. After launching devastating attacks on Iran's nuclear infrastructure, he suddenly announced a ceasefire and declared victory. This apparent about-face raised questions about America's true intentions. Hezbollah suffered similarly devastating losses, including the assassination of longtime leader Hassan Nasrallah in a bunker-busting strike that demonstrated Israel's remarkable intelligence capabilities. These casualties represent the most significant losses Iran has suffered in direct confrontation with Israel since the Islamic Revolution. Without nuclear weapons, Iran's deterrent capability is severely diminished, making it vulnerable to the kind of regime change operations that have toppled other Middle Eastern governments. For Israel, the destruction of Iran's nuclear program represents a strategic victory that could reshape the entire regional balance of power. This wasn't just diplomatic posturing. It represented a fundamental ideological commitment that has shaped Iranian foreign policy for over 4 decades. Some analysts suggest that the United States intervened not to help Iran, but to prevent a complete Iranian collapse that could destabilize the entire Middle East. First, it demonstrates how quickly alliances can shift when national interests change. Iran's ability to threaten Israel through proxy organizations allowed it to maintain pressure on its enemy while avoiding direct retaliation. However, this strategy ultimately proved unsustainable when Israel decided to systematically dismantle the proxy network. The secret cooperation between Iran and Israel in the 1980s shows that even the most unlikely partnerships are possible when survival is at stake. Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons forced Israel to contemplate preemptive action, leading to the current crisis. Born from the ashes of revolution and nurtured by decades of mistrust and ideological opposition, this conflict has shaped the Middle East for over 40 years. As both nations stand at the brink of their most serious confrontation yet, the world watches to see whether diplomacy can prevail or whether the region will be reshaped by force. What is certain is that the Iran-Israel conflict will continue to shape regional and global politics for years to come, making it one of the most important geopolitical stories of our time. American intervention, whether to support Israel or prevent complete Iranian collapse, has proven decisive in shaping the conflict's trajectory. For Israel, the elimination of the Iranian threat is seen as necessary for long-term security and regional acceptance. For the broader Middle East, the outcome will determine whether the region moves towards stability and cooperation or continues to be defined by conflict and division. The Jewish state's survival depends on maintaining military superiority over its enemies and preventing hostile powers from acquiring weapons of mass destruction. The current crisis represents Israel's most serious attempt to eliminate the Iranian threat once and for all. The old order, built on proxy conflicts and shadow wars, is giving way to something new and potentially more dangerous. Whether this leads to a more stable region or further chaos remains to be seen. Iran's vision of an Islamic revolutionary order stands in direct opposition to Israel's goal of regional acceptance and normalization. The outcome of this conflict will determine whether the Middle East moves toward integration and cooperation or continues to be defined by sectarian and ideological divisions. The exchange of missile strikes between the two nations, with at least 27 people wounded in Israel after Iran launched 40 missiles, represented a dramatic escalation in their decades-long conflict. A failed state in Iran could create chaos far worse than the current conflict, potentially leading to massive refugee flows, sectarian violence, and the spread of nuclear materials to terrorist groups. Israel's response was swift and decisive. Rather than simply retaliating against Hamas, Israeli forces embarked on a systematic campaign to dismantle Iran's entire proxy network. President Donald Trump's involvement in the Israel-Iran conflict introduced a new dimension to the crisis. The U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities represented the most direct American involvement in the conflict to date. Was this a genuine attempt to bring peace to the region, or was it a calculated move to prevent Israel from going too far? The June 2025 escalation marked the first time Iran and Israel engaged in direct military confrontation rather than proxy warfare. The human cost of this escalation became clear when Iran reported that at least 35 Air Defense Force personnel were killed in Israeli attacks, including 2 brigadier generals and 7 colonels. The targeting of Iran's nuclear facilities strikes at the heart of the regime's survival strategy. The Iran-Israel conflict represents more than just a bilateral dispute. It is a struggle for the future of the Middle East. The transformation of the Israeli embassy in Tehran into the Palestinian embassy symbolized Iran's complete rejection of Israel's right to exist. For Israel, the conflict with Iran is existential in nature. The Iran-Israel conflict offers several important lessons about the nature of international relations and the dangers of ideological extremism. Second, the conflict illustrates the power of proxy warfare as a tool of state policy. Third, the nuclear dimension of the conflict shows how weapons of mass destruction can fundamentally alter regional power dynamics. Finally, the conflict demonstrates the importance of great power involvement in regional disputes. As we witness the unfolding of this historic confrontation, one thing remains clear: the Middle East is experiencing a fundamental transformation. The Iran-Israel conflict represents one of the most complex and consequential disputes in modern international relations. The stakes could not be higher. For Iran, survival of the Islamic Revolution depends on maintaining its deterrent capability and regional influence. History will judge whether the dramatic events of 2025 represent a turning point toward peace or the beginning of an even more dangerous chapter in Middle Eastern history.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more engaging historical content.